What's up, everybody? This is Fred Ricciani of TSC News right here in MNN. We've got a fun show for you guys. We're going to preview the WWE Extreme Rules pay-per-view, take a special look back at our interview with former WWE and Impact Wrestling Women's Champion Gail Kim. But first, our interview with the man called the Fight Nerd, a creator of sports content for over a decade, Matt Kaplowitz. We have right here on the line, on the TSC News line, a very special guest. He is a producer, a filmmaker, a journalist, a longtime friend of TSC News. He's somebody I met actually years ago when we first started. Y'all may know him as the Fight Nerd. We're calling him Matt Kaplowitz, New York's own. Matt, how's it going?
Well, what? That was an intro that is worthy of many, many gold stars. I feel like I've got so many accolades all of a sudden. Thank you for making me feel very important, Fred.
You're very welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. Now, you are famous for your short film On Point, your film Girl Fight, which people can stream on Amazon, and all the work you've done behind the scenes in sports production. You've also done a lot of nerdy, cool things as well. But I think a lot of people originally know you from the Fight Nerd website. Can you just introduce yourself to some people that may not know you?
All right, well, I guess people might know me from the Fight Nerd, as Fred mentioned. It used to be a website I ran from 2009 to basically early this year, where I finally shut it down, where I covered all sorts of MMA news, combat sports news in New York and around the world. And from there, it basically helped launch me into the TV world a little bit, where I got to work with Fred on MMA Uncensored on Spike TV. And now I'm off making films, working for other people, and doing all sorts of other crazy stuff in between.
Was filmmaking always your main goal? Was it to be a journalist and eventually end up on Fox or ESPN? Or did you kind of just go with the flow and do things you liked and try to make a living off of them?
I'd say it's more of go with the flow. I never really intended to be a full-time journalist, ever. Even when I started the website for the Fight Nerd, it was more like an experiment. I always consider it, especially early on, it was more of an experiment to see what I could do with it and if I could take this brand and go places with it. The idea was ultimately to actually branch out into multiple websites originally, where the Fight Nerd would be like the MMA site, and then I'd have a crew of however many people it was involved with it, which at its peak I actually had a nice little crew helping me out. And then the goal from there would have been to actually make other websites and build onto some kind of media empire, but ultimately I didn't really want to do the journalist thing. I've always been kind of more interested in just, I guess for a lack of a better term, is storytelling. When I went to college, I was actually a illustration major, so my goal was originally thinking of doing storyboards for film or animation especially, and then maybe working into like that world. Or so that could have been, graphic novels as well, comic artwork, again, storyboards. I kind of just wanted to see where things would go. But ultimately the website did help me. It taught me about editing. It taught me about having interview skills, which is always very important, communication skills. It taught me a lot of different tools that I'm now using in my filmmaking stuff.
Oh, yeah, I can certainly attest to that, covering all those events in the early days. And let's talk a little bit about the early days, because you did cover MMA. You're a longtime MMA fan. But before that, you were also a pro wrestling fan, still are. Big comic book, video game fan. Which love came first for you?
It's tough to say. I think technically pro wrestling came first, if we go chronologically, because my dad likes to tell the story of when I was born. He says I was 3 days old, and I guess there was wrestling on, and I'm pretty sure it must have been Saturday Night Main Event. My dad said he held me up, a little, 3-day-old baby, to the TV to watch whatever was going on Saturday Night Main Event. So I guess pro wrestling would probably come first, but comics didn't come too far after that either.
Who drew you into pro wrestling?
Well, my era was basically, I guess you could say, I was post-Hogan when I was really aware of what was happening in wrestling as a kid. So I guess Bret Hart was probably my guy. Bret Hart was always one of my favorites, and still is one of my favorites. So it was Bret, especially because he was more relatable as opposed to like a lot of the big guys you'd see. Like Hogan, to me, it was an older generation at that point. I didn't really see that much of him on TV just because of what I saw. So I was more of the Bret Hart guy. He was smaller, he was more technical, he was skilled, and that's how he got around the big guys. And me being like the shortest kid in class, I kind of it hit me. And I was like, this guy's doing it because he's got the skills. I could get the skills, and I can do what he's doing as well.
Bret Hart was definitely the man back in the day. And you later got into MMA. I'm somebody that kind of got into MMA probably a little bit later than you did. And when I got hooked, I mean, it was like pro wrestling. I got hooked. I wanted to learn so much about it. Read books, watched documentaries, DVR'd all kinds of fights. It sucked me in. And now it's like pro wrestling where I can't ever fully get out of the bubble even if I wanted to. What drew you into MMA?
think early on, a little bit was actually just the technique itself of it. It was really novel to me. Like I got into it when I was in, guess probably I always get like stuck on what the actual year was because I'm pretty sure the first UFC that was happening that I was aware of was UFC 22, which was the main event Tito and Frank, which is a big, huge fight for the early days of UFC. So I got in whatever that year was, and I basically started with UFC 1. I was actually looking in the pro wrestling tape section of a VHS store. Remember VHSs, Fred? You remember those?
Oh my goodness, I'm old enough to remember those, Matt.
Yeah, I don't know how many listeners are, but I mean, for you guys out there, yeah, it's old times. We used to have horses and buggies back then. But anyway, yeah, I was looking in a VHS store, and I found in the pro wrestling section UFC 1. And at the time, too, I was just starting to get a little bit back into pro wrestling because I had a few years where I just wasn't watching it because I didn't have access to cable. So I was basically out of the game for quite some time. And so I found it through there, and I got hooked just because of watching the technique of seeing like little Hoist Gracie again, tapping out all these guys, and just the idea of the style versus style was a really intriguing, really fascinating idea. And it was just immediately hooked from there.
And how disappointed were you to find out that this awesome sport you just discovered, these beautiful techniques, it was not available to watch live in New York?
Oh man, for many years that has always been the biggest worst thing. Like, for me especially, like I also used to train judo, and I did Brazilian jiu-jitsu for a few years. And it's like, if I wanted to see fights, and especially if I want to cover fights later on, doing my website or working for other people, I have to go out of state to see it. So that was always heartbreaking for me, just for so many years, because you get to know all these people that are training here in New York to do fights, to compete, and they've all got to travel elsewhere to do it. But now, thankfully, we finally have it here in New York. It's amazing, and we've got all the big shows coming now. UFC's been here, Bellator's coming here very soon. World Series of Fighting did their show as well. So the whole landscape has changed tremendously from the day that I first got started in this sport.
Do you think with New York finally legalizing MMA the last couple of years, do you think that's going to prolong MMA's relevance, or do you think they need to do more to kind of have another boom period? Because they have Conor McGregor right now. He may inexplicably fight Floyd Mayweather, which would have never happened in another era of MMA. You have Ronda Rousey, who's pretty much retired. Anderson Silva's on his last legs, pretty much literally. George St. Pierre, who knows when he's going to fight. Michael Bisping, who could be something of a draw with the right opponent. He's not getting any younger. What can MMA do right now to kind of expand its relevancy?
I think we've hit an oversaturation point with mixed martial arts. In relation to New York in specific, Dana White has said many times in the past, like, we don't need New York. It's not a big deal. That was his whole thing. Until things in the legislation were actually moving forward at a breakneck speed for whatever reason that happened, there was plenty of times where Dana was like, we don't need New York, and he publicly said that. So New York, I don't think is going to make a big difference. It's just another place to run fights. I think the biggest problem is oversaturation, and this is something that I remember Dana saying way back when he first took over. Was his goal was to have UFC on every night on TV, and he's getting closer and closer to that dream. And there's been plenty of times where the boom periods have happened, and we've had MMA on almost every single night. I remember when I was first getting, when I found out my first live event, I should say, that was about 2006. So that's the time when IFL was happening, which was my very first show ever. I was actually at the very first IFL show in Atlantic City. Bodog was happening. We had, I think Strikeforce might have been around, but obviously not as big. I think WFA was still a thing, King of the Cage, but they weren't on TV yet. But point being, there were several companies that were actually having syndicated TV deals, so it was starting to happen. That died out. I think really it's just oversaturation. We have now Ultimate Fighter, we have Fight Nights, we have the Fight Pass, which has all sorts of other fights going on. There's too much of it. I think that's the biggest problem. There's too much of it. There's a lot of fighters now. It's really hard to keep up with the storylines if there are any with these people. So I think that's kind of the big thing is it's oversaturation, and there's not really necessarily a superstar that has the drawing power of, let's say, a guy like from boxing, Mike Tyson. Right now we have Conor McGregor. He's pretty darn close to that. I think if anything, he is that right now. We had Ronda Rousey, and that was a huge boon to mixed martial arts because that brought in all sorts of new viewers. I don't know if Conor is bringing in new viewers necessarily, but he is a big draw. So I think that's really the biggest thing is finding the names to drive the car forward of UFC and MMA in general. And again, at this point, I said UFC just because they are the top dog. There really is no other competition, unfortunately, for them. Even Bellator, they're trying, and they've got some good stuff. But at the end of the day, UFC is running how many shows a week now, almost, or how many shows a month, whereas Bellator, they're still going at their own pace. So, in a nutshell, I think that's my thoughts. Just we need to pull back a little bit and focus more on promoting a few of the top guys.
This Sunday's Extreme Rules pay-per-view card for the Raw brand is a bit of a mixed bag. It's the night that WWE goes extreme, or hardcore as some longtime fans know it. We have a fatal five-way, yes, another multi-man match between Roman Reigns, Finn Balor, Samoa Joe, Seth Rollins, and Bray Wyatt. The winner faces Brock Lesnar for the Universal Championship in July at the unfortunately named Great Balls of Fire event. That's a real name. We have Bayley versus Alexa Bliss for the Raw Women's title and a kendo stick on a pole match. Weird stipulation, but should be pretty good given their last affair. We have the Hardy Boys defending their tag titles against Sheamus and Cesaro inside of a steel cage. And we have Dean Ambrose defending his Intercontinental title against The Miz in a match where he could lose via disqualification and lose his title via disqualification, despite this pay-per-view being called, Extreme Rules. It is what it is. And lastly, Austin Aries versus Adrian Neville for the third time. The Cruiserweight Championship's on the line yet again. Can Austin Aries, a former TSC News guest, finally capture that elusive title in WWE? We shall find out. And speaking of titles, we had the pleasure of interviewing former WWE and TNA Women's Champion Gail Kim a few years back at Philly Comic-Con. And let's check out our throwback clip of the week featuring Miss Kim.
It's my first Comic-Con since I've been back with Impact Wrestling. So definitely this was the one I wanted to be at because Philadelphia is full of wrestling fans. It's crazy today, I'm sure you've seen. So I just love meeting the fans, getting to know them, their opinions and hearing their comments. And it's, just fun to get one-on-one time with them.
Why do you feel like TNA is a lot more open to more women's wrestling, more angles with women as opposed to WWE?
I just think, I'm not sure exactly the reasoning why in terms of why one company does it and the other. You could say it's because Dixie Carter is also a woman, so she can understand, I think they all know in our office that we work so hard. We work just as hard as the guys, and we want to have matches as good as, the guys, and we want to show the fans that we know that the fans want to see it. I mean, for the longest time when there was no women's wrestling. It kind of died at one point, right before the first Knockouts division. People used to tell me all the time, "Oh, women, they don't want to see women's wrestling, Gail," and it made me sad. And I said, "No, that cannot be true." And I kind of, kept on. I was that cheesy, fighter for women's wrestling. And when we had such great success, and the fan response that we got, I said, "See." They wanted to see it. And I definitely think that just judging from all the fans that we've seen at live events, on TVs and pay-per-views all over the world, they want to see it. So we're just giving them what they want to see. I mean, just the whole series with Kong, for both of us, I think. I have such great respect for her, and I think she has respect for me. And what we did in that ring, we had magic chemistry. It was just the perfect time, too. I think that like I said, there was no strong women's wrestling at the time, and it just kind of came out of nowhere, and it was that perfect David and Goliath feud, and it was just something special. I can't say anything beyond that, and I will even though my body hurt like I've never had it hurt in my 12 years of wrestling, I will never take back a moment of it, because just those were the moments that you dream about when you want to become a pro wrestler. The longest time, a lot of people were saying, "Oh, ex-WWE talent," and I think they've done a really good job of recognizing these guys who are so talented. I think I've known Bobby or Robert Roode, he goes by Bobby, I think now, since the Indies. We all started out together, Showtime, Eric Young, Tracy Brooks, Bobby, myself, Scott D'Amore. I mean, we all came out through it together, so, I knew how talented he was, and I think other people knew how talented he was. It was just a matter of time before the company knew that. And now, look, it's the longest reigning TNA heavyweight champion of all time now. So it's a great thing.
You've been covering MMA for a long time, not to continue the theme of you being an old fart and everything, but the MMA has made a lot of strides. It's made a lot of strides in terms of, visibility, a lot of places for guys to work. But I feel like the most disappointing thing for me, covering the sport for a while, is the lack of increase in fighter pay. Maybe some of the top guys are making more than, some of the guys did 5-10 years ago. But I feel like overall, with the Reebok deal and everything, with less options, they're making a whole lot less. Can you see a near future where eventually MMA fighters get remotely what they deserve in terms of pay?
A lot of that depends ultimately on marketing and promotions, I'd say, more than anything else. I think that's kind of been like Dana White's prerogative as well, is, like, we have to spend all this money to push things forward, and eventually we'll be able to pay what boxers make. But, again, from someone that's been watching since Dana took over and even before then, granted, he's done big things to get things to the place that they are now, and the pay has increased. But, I think it's twofold, too, is does it have the same draw as boxing does still? And, boxing, is it on the up? Is it on the down? That's always debatable. But at the end of the day, it's still a lot more mainstream than MMA is at this point. So I think that's going to be like the biggest factor is, can MMA become as mainstream as boxing? And then we could probably get those bigger paydays. So, for now, at least we're starting to get closer. But yeah, really, I think one of the biggest things that's going to hold that back is this, in UFC in particular, is that Reebok deal. For a lot of fighters, getting those sponsorship deals was huge to them, because that's not just, sponsorship for a fight. That's money coming in year round, potentially. It's other little small endorsement deals that they can use. Now this Reebok deal, it's kind of like, you're stuck. And that's great if you're on the top of the fence. But when you're some guy that's just starting out in the UFC, it looks like it's going to be great to you, but long run, it might not be so good. And there's a lot of fighters who can attest for that. And, a lot of young fighters who are going to learn as they get older, maybe this deal might not be so good right now for them.
Right, and we should note, too, for anybody that's not familiar with the Reebok deal pays based on tenure, from what I understand, in addition to sales, right? They have like a basic scale, and then you get like a certain percentage from sales, as opposed to sponsorships where, there were some guys making a couple $100,000 just off of sponsorships alone.
Yeah, it's a lot more money. Again, it depends how big of a fighter you are, but if you're a smaller fighter, it might be cool you're getting like free Reebok gear here and there, but, Reebok gear doesn't pay the bills. And so, I think really that's the one thing I want to see happen with this sport is, some kind of a way for these fighters to be taken care of when they can't fight anymore. There's so many of these guys who, when they reach a certain age, they have to retire, or they have to keep fighting, and they're just fighting terrible fights or losing all the time. They're just hurting themselves in a lot of different ways. And what do they do afterwards? Like, they can teach, I guess, they can coach, but that's not much of a retirement life. You see some of these fighters now from the early golden age of the UFC, especially, and a lot of these guys have some brain damage issues. They have all sorts of other health issues, and they have issues making money as well. So, if they have a serious healthcare problem, they've got to find ways to make money, or they have to find ways to raise money. And, I'm hoping that this generation of fighters now is not going to have that problem. I'm hoping that there'll be something done long term, that the fighter safety will be taken into account for, and that 20, 30 years from now, when they're no longer able to fight at all, they're going to have some kind of, I don't know if it's a pension or healthcare benefits from the UFC or something like that, but something has to be done across the board for people that are doing this for a living, because otherwise, it's not like the NFL. It's not like a major league sport where they're making big bucks and they can afford to do this for a few years and stop.
After 3 rounds of action in the featherweight division, we have a majority decision.
Some of your best work has been outside of the realm of Bellator MMA, Spike TV, that whole family, with Girl Fight, the Muay Thai documentary that you can now stream on Amazon, which won a number of awards. Can you tell fans a little bit about that?
Sure. So Girl Fight, a Muay Thai story, and we have to make sure we say that part because there's like 2 other Girl Fight movies out there. One is by Anne Heche, the other one's by Michelle Rodriguez, and don't give them your money. Give your money to me instead, please. I beg you of that. So Girl Fight, a Muay Thai story is a documentary that I started shooting in February 2013, and I shot that until I guess summer or fall of 2014. So essentially 18 months of filming. And the documentary is about an all-female kickboxing gym that's on the Jersey Shore. And so, yeah, again, we followed them for 18 months. We followed the head coach and a few of the students through a whole bunch of different fights and all the trials and tribulations that you get as an amateur fighter, which is still a lot of it is still the same as a professional fighter. It's all the things they have to go through and ultimately what they do at the end of the day to survive all these kind of big obstacles and setbacks and move forward in the face of defeat and weirdness and all the bizarreness that happened across the 18 months that we filmed them.
And did you have any challenges when it came to filming this in terms of acquiring footage or dealing with any of the fighters? I mean, we've dealt with a lot of MMA fighters, pro wrestlers, different athletes. Was Muay Thai a bit of a different animal?
At the end of the day, it's all the same. I really didn't have too many issues. I mean, oddly enough, we actually had footage. You see in the beginning of the movie when we're hyping up one of the fights between Prairie Regillo and her first opponent in the film. We just happened to actually have shot footage ourselves of their first fight at an event we covered. So who knew? We just happened to have that footage, which is great. Craziest thing to happen. But yeah, no, in terms of like that kind of thing and rights and filming people, no, not really any problems there. I think the biggest issues were more so balancing working and going out to Jersey to film. that was always something of a challenge. More so just trying to figure out a lot of the ins and outs of it, as well as, with documentaries, and this might even answer a few other questions you have later. I mean, with documentaries, they might start as one idea and they turn to something else later on. And a lot of that is what happened with Girl Fight. And the biggest reason why I went 18 months was because I was kind of waiting naturally to see where the story went and just find that concluding point that would tell the story from every perspective and from every character and person that we followed. So that was really just one of the biggest challenges, is like, how do you tell a story that's happening in real time in front of you that you have no control over? And, I know there's a lot of documentary filmmakers who have done things, especially in combat sports, where it kind of is a narrative, and it's a much shorter narrative than 18 months. They'll maybe film 1 or 2 fights, and things are pretty, not scripted, but they have a plot. They've made a plot. They might be, again, not reading lines, but the director knows what he wants to get. This was a case where I wanted to just kind of let things happen, and so that's kind of the biggest challenge there, is like, you have no control over what's happening in front of you. You have to let it happen and make the best out of what happens. So that's just like the scariest thing. So when you go back to the editing room and you're just like, well, what do I do with this? What do I do with that? The audio is terrible here, but this is really important. You have to start doing a lot of, I used to call them big boy decisions. You got to put on the big boy pants and make some tough calls. So that's probably the hardest thing. That's just filmmaking in general too.
And was there a big difference in terms of getting feedback? Because when we worked on MMA Uncensored Live, which was a weekly news magazine show for Spike, we'd film features and we helped, work on them and film and everything else like that. But, usually we'd film something that would air like 2 weeks later, a week later, sometimes, the week of. And we get instant gratification. We get instant feedback on Twitter, social media, the network, all that jazz. Whereas with a documentary, one that you've been working on for 18 months, I mean, you're there every day in the editing room. You're waiting for the story to progress. You're putting it all together. You're not going to get feedback until you show it at film festivals, until you show it to friends and family, until you show it to people that maybe just want to check it out and have never seen it before. Was that kind of a nerve-wracking part of the process?
Absolutely. It's like the first film fest we went to, which was actually in Rahway. It was the Rahway Film Festival 2015. And that was the first, essentially, premiere ever of it. And so that's like, we're getting real-time feedback essentially for that. And, it happened at every film festival I went to. I would go sit in the back of the theater and just watch everybody and see their reactions. And, to be quite honest, the film festival crowd, they're not fight fans ever. And I would say that no fight fans ever showed up to watch the documentary, because that's just not the crowd that goes out to see art house films. So, I'm going there. I'm basically dealing with the 70 to 80-year-old grandma market who like to see fine arts films, or, again, just that similar kind of crowd. So that'd be the thing where it's like you're showing this movie 90 minutes of fighting in front of people that don't know what fighting even is really. They don't even know what kickboxing is. They think it's probably eye gouging and ripping people's faces off with their bare hands. So it's a little bit of a challenge. And my biggest concern was like, is this crowd going to react positively to this kind of a film? And luckily they did. It's like the most fun thing ever, where you're sitting, again, I'm sitting in the back and I'm watching like a 70-year-old woman who's never watched a boxing fight even or anything like that before. And the first half hour, they're really kind of tentative. They're not too into it. They're a little scared of the fights. But then we kind of get to the human parts of the story. And really, I guess about half an hour in, everything kind of changes for all the characters. And that's the moment where I usually see like a turn in the audience, where they get the switch clicked on. And things start happening in their heads. They start relating to it. They start seeing the bigger story. They start seeing the bigger picture. And then by the final fight in the movie an hour later, like you got 6-year-old grandmas who are like bobbing and weaving and throwing punches. And I'm not even joking. Like that happened many times. And then like even afterwards they'd come up to me and tell me like, I've never seen a fight ever, but that was so great. So feedback has been very good, and especially because I know fight fans will hopefully check this out no matter what. Again, the big thing was getting non-fight fans to come in, and from what I've heard so far, I think we've accomplished that.
Oh yeah, as somebody that got to watch the documentary, definitely great stuff, Matt. Very happy for your success. And if you guys want to watch it, Amazon Video, check it out. You can either buy it, you can rent it, or you can watch it as part of your Amazon Prime subscription. Anywhere else?
Well, aside from Amazon and Amazon Prime, it's actually also on the Fight TV app. So if you guys download Fight TV, you can rent it there as well. And basically, it's a great way to kick things off before watching a Ring of Honor pay-per-view or some other MMA or kickboxing shows.
Now, before we let you go, Matt, we know you've been working on a short film, which also got some critical acclaim, and you've been working a lot with Bellator, with their MSG special. What have you got coming up, and where can fans check out your work?
Well, one of the things I've been trying to do a lot is not get myself pigeonholed in MMA. It's been a big thing for me to get myself out of there. Girl Fight was a step towards that. My short On Point was another step towards that, which was radically different. That was, again, about a 6'3", 280-pound male ballet and burlesque dancer. That's pretty far out there from MMA. So that's been the progression, essentially. And so the next thing I'm actually working on is another feature-length doc. And this one has been in production for now close to 2 years, if you can believe it. I basically started it not long after I finished Girl Fight, and I've been continuing to film it since then. And it's a documentary about my uncle. He's going to be 88 this year, and he is a painter. He has a studio in Union Square, New York, which for your viewers out there who might not know, Union Square is a very historic art community in Manhattan. It's been the location of many political rallies and political events that have happened since the turn of the century in New York. And my uncle has had a studio there since the 1960s. I mean, it's a place where he used to walk outside the building and across from him he'd see Andy Warhol and people like that. So he's been there since the 1960s working and creating artwork. And at his age, he still commutes 5 to 6 days a week to go out there and just keep making artwork. And so that's essentially the story, is what drives this man who has so many health problems. He has prostate cancer. He has all these issues. What drives him to keep going out there despite not being super well known in a lot of ways, not being, an uber popular kind of artist, barely making ends meet, but he continues to do it no matter what. So what is the drive behind this man and what keeps him going? And so hopefully that will be done, I want to say early fall, and then we're going to start hitting the Film Fest circuit and see what happens from there. So if anybody wants to check that out, you can follow me on Facebook at my production company, which is Burning Hammer Productions. And if you want to follow the progress of Girl Fight and check out all the other cool stuff we post, because we post a lot of stuff on Girl Fight, the Girl Fight, a Muay Thai Story Facebook page, you can just look up on Facebook, Girl Fight, a Muay Thai Story. We're also on Twitter, which is just at Girl Fight Story. And of course, please follow and check out the Girl Fight Gym page, especially if you're ever out in Jersey and you want to do some training. If you're a female viewer or a male viewer, they do have some co-ed classes. Check out the actual Girl Fight Gym on Facebook too. Give them a buzz. They're doing big things. They just started a BJJ program with Claudia Galdeja, in fact, heading that. So that's all the stuff. That's all the links. And please do follow it. And I hope you all do have a chance to check out the movie. And more importantly, I hope you like it and get something out of it.
Thanks so much to Matt and Gail Kim for the time. If you want more TSC news, please visit youtube.com/thesportscourier.